in French and English. I was born in Wagga Wagga, if you know where that is, in New South Wales. But I was lucky enough to have some French-speaking people around when I was growing up and studied in France as well, as in Australia. And I have a master's degree in translation and interpreting from Monash University. So today I wanted to look at some of the common problems that I sometimes see when people write to me in English. Sorry, let me just let this person in. Hi, Madeleine. Okay, so yeah, so I wanted to look at a few of the common problems, and you probably got others that you might face yourselves, or the ones that are that you particularly struggle with. So please ask me about those if I don't cover them. We might just look at a couple of examples together, and then I have a few tips just in terms of writing and syntax for making your English sound a bit more natural. So, get going. So, yeah, the common problems that I see. So, yeah, making sure that you remember that English is not a gendered language. So, obviously, they're not saying her like or for the company or something like la société, like her profit was whatever. Is so making sure that you remember to use it or they for nouns, preposition, unless it is obviously a he or a she if it's a person. Prepositions. So sometimes I see some strange combinations of prepositions. Things like, yeah, to participate to, whereas, yeah, it's usually participate in or register for something, not register to something in English. So get up, come in, reply to, sign up for. Because in French, prepositions don't sort of, I guess they don't generally bear as much weight as English ones. So if you think of a and de in French, there's often a noun that comes after it. So like, for example, dans un délai de 3 semaines. In English, you don't have to say in a period of 3 weeks. You can just say in 3 weeks. Or c'est de la part de qui. You can just say who's calling or who's it from. Or for example, je ne suis pas spécialiste en matière de sculpture. I'm not an expert on sculpture. So you don't have to have that big long construction in English. The other thing that sometimes I see is, yeah, the level of informality or formality with regard to Australia and what's usual. And yeah, obviously you probably know because you've been here for a while that English in Australia is usually less formal. So you can say hi, so and so, even if you don't know them that well. Yeah, using dear in emails is not super common. You can use hi or hello usually. Yeah, there's less hierarchy in Australian culture. And the other thing that I see is direct question. So in French, you can form a question by simply adding a question mark, like at the end of a statement. So like, tu habites à Dublin, then it becomes a question, but you can't just say you live in Dublin and make it a question in English. You have to have, do you live in Dublin? But keep in mind that indirect questions are often helpful in Australia because they soften a request and come across as less demanding, which is more culturally accepted. So that, could you tell me? Do you know? I was wondering, would it be possible? Is there any chance you could? Are often used, especially in email communication, rather than just can you, or yeah, or saying to someone, do this, or yeah, often there is people use those kind of hedging constructions to soften a request. Um, any questions so far? Keep moving. So this is an example that I took from a website that's probably been translated by someone who's not a native English speaker. Can you pick out a couple of things that don't seem quite right? why work with us? It probably needs a question mark, maybe. But this strong of an international network of expert engineers is obviously the direct kind of translation of fort d'un réseau international d'ingénieurs experts. It doesn't quite work in English. So what would you do to change that? Can anyone want to have a go at suggesting what you would change or how you could reword it?
The strengths of an international network, maybe?
Yep. So, yeah, with the strength of an international network of engineers, yep. That would work, yep. It's just it's quite a long sentence in general too. And in the various fields of is okay in English, but you could probably kind of make it a bit more concise or even leave it out. You could put something like, we have an international network of experts in oil and gas mining, renewables, nuclear, infrastructure and transport ready to help you design, execute or maintain your projects worldwide. That you could do something, a little bit more tight. That was a bit tighter in English. Yeah. Cool. Another example, of sort of things that probably are a little bit funny in English. This kind of like, we offer the capability and network of a multinational firm allied to, kind of doesn't really work in English. And again, be careful. Yep.
Would you use combined with?
Yep. So combined with, yes, that will work really well. And you could do combined with, or as well as, I guess you could use something like that as well. Combined is good. Of a startup. You probably don't even need company there. And be also one thing to be also careful of is plural. So there's one of the best track record and overhead. They should probably be plural in English because one of something is usually a plural. Again, gathers one of the best track record is a bit kind of strange to me. Even just has one of the best track records. Yeah, and often we don't always start sentences with "and" in English. It's okay, but I wouldn't do it really, really often. And through a close relationship, having the right competencies at the right place, fast and at the right price. Kind of, it's okay, but it sounds a bit wonky in English maybe. I'd probably do something like, we make sure you get the skills you need when you need them at the right price or something like that. That one. So these are now my 3 kind of tips are to be more direct, to be less negative, and also to use adverbs and to use ing in English maybe a bit more. So English is generally more direct and more linear. It goes like sort of A, B, and C, whereas French can go a bit roundabout. English usually goes from the means to the end. So from the cause to the effect, where sometimes in French you can get things around the other way. So, for example, this sentence is quite confusing, like poor assessment of the student and misunderstandings may result from cultural differences between the student and the teacher. It's hard to know what's related to what. So you want to have situation, which is cultural differences is the means, and the end is how does this happen? How do the cultural differences happen? Is cultural differences between the student and the teacher can lead to misunderstandings and poor assessment of the student, because it's not the poor assessment of the student that should be sort of like the main subject. It's the cultural differences that can cause poor assessment and misunderstandings. Yep. So again, in being going from A to B to C, this whole idea of often in French where we use grâce à is usually an indicator of going from the end back to the means instead of the means to the end. So often it's a good idea to flip it in English. So for example, I don't know, pour accélérer la transformation de la société grâce à l'éducation, I'll probably put using education to step up societal transformation or something like that. I think I would flip it around the other way in English. And again, with grâce à, it can be thanks to, but it could also be through or using or leveraging. So maybe do a double think if you're going to use thanks to every time you use grâce à, because it might not be thanks to. And second thing, be more positive in English. It's usually more positive, uses less negative constructions. I mean, it does use it, but maybe less than French. So, like, for example, if you say il n'est pas mal, in English, you might say he's not bad, but you might also say he's pretty good looking. This is like a construction that's quite common. Ne sont que l'une. So it's emphasizing the fact that it's not the only one, but we wouldn't always say in English are not the only piece. I would probably, if I was translating this, more likely to put it into the positive and say are only one piece of the puzzle. Yeah. Rather than not the only piece of the puzzle. Not to say that you shouldn't not use negative constructions in English, but maybe less so compared to the French. Then ing, so using comma plus ing or just ing, so the gerund is a really good way of kind of tightening up sentences in English rather than having long sentences with heaps of subclauses, which is common in French. So yeah, you can use ing with lots of different verbs. So yeah, like demonstrating, growing, improving. So for example, here, this sentence in the French, which has a lot of commas, a lot of subclauses. So par ailleurs, il va conforter le quartier Pleyel en pleine transformation avec l'addition d'une des gares les plus emblématiques du Grand Paris Express. So this is from a translation that I had recently. So the par ailleurs, I've just put also, so it will also strengthen the transformation of the Pleyel district. So I've just moved this in front, the transformation in front, and then I put comma, adding one of the most iconic Grand Paris Express stations. Again, another example, nous avons établi un schéma directeur de réutilisation des matériaux. The French has more of a tendency to use nouns than verbs compared to English. So here, la réutilisation in English, reusing is for, rather than saying for the reuse of materials, it would be super long in English and maybe not as natural. You can do, we developed a master plan for reusing materials. Then the next point I had was to use more adverbs. So in French, for example, it's, yeah, you don't have that many adverbs that are single words because you don't always add ment, M-E-N-T, to words as easily as L-Y in English. And so you've got things, so for example, vers l'intérieur, in English you can just do inwards, or avec un peu d'espoir, hopefully, or de manière surprenante, surprisingly. So think about using some adjectives, even things like dans le sens des aiguilles d'une montre, you can put clockwise in English, so it's a lot shorter and more succinct. Yep, so for example, again, the L, adding ly, ce détail est d'une importance décisive. This detail is crucially important. So So you can use adverbs in English a lot more. Don't be afraid to use the imperative voice in English. So you can be quite direct. And you can use the active voice most of the time. Not to say you don't use the passive, but it's probably more common to see the active in English. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about verbs, which is my last point. So yeah, to ask you guys what verbs you might struggle with in French, like animer. Some of the three that I picked were animer, favoriser, and obtenir. Because animer and favoriser can mean a lot of things in different contexts in French. So I don't know if those are ones that you struggle with or not. What would you use for animer?
It's not an easy one.
It's not. No. Like, for example, animer une réunion ou animer une activité. The thing.
Lead.
Yeah, lead is a good one. Yep, lead, or organize, coordinate, facilitate. You facilitate a meeting a lot in English. You can host, or yeah, those kind of things. Lead or run a workshop, moderate, even set up. Yep, depending on the context. Yep, but certainly not animate. Favoriser is a tricky one too. The example like qui favorise le développement durable or something like that. Because you wouldn't say in English, you wouldn't say it favors sustainable development. It supports, or it again facilitates or enables, or you could, depending on the context, contributes to. Yeah, yep. Improves, provides for, allows, yep, helps, yep. Contribute is a good one. Yep. Cool. That's all the slides that I had. So if anyone has any questions, let me know. And otherwise, if you want to send me any texts to get some feedback on